You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Dude, I just because, we were so plugged in the CrossFit community for so long, and then obviously unplugged from the CrossFit community, a lot of these games preps kind of situations like you guys in like Training Think Tank, really just popped up as like the games became something more than just a novelty. And as I was going through, I didn't realize like how many of these is what would just make sense. I mean, you have high level performers and, they want to build teams, and it's, akin to like a professional sport where, so-and-so now builds a team and they want people to come in and train under their philosophy. And it's been pretty interesting that all these different, CrossFit Games athletes now have their own philosophy on how to necessarily gamify this thing or train for it. So it's pretty interesting, kind of unplugging and then trying to go back and like, oh shit, like this thing is so much more grown up than just like, I get emails from some guy that was randomly training by himself in the garage who's like, in 2 years, I'm going to win the CrossFit Games, where now it's become, big business. You have teams, competitors, sending guys out for, smaller regional events as training and tests and this, and it's really grown into this thing. And I was going to ask you a little bit more about like, what is Training Think Tank, and more importantly, like the evolution to where you guys are today and kind of how this whole thing started.
Yeah, well, defining what Training Think Tank is a little bit of a challenge because, I feel like we've been a lot of things over the last 11 or 12 years, but primarily we are an organization that works with high level CrossFitters. That's just kind of like how it was the first thing that we did. We had some success with athletes at the CrossFit Games. So that's like what built our sort of notoriety. But once we did that, the next step for us was building education. So we realized that like our approach was very different to the traditional CrossFit approach. It was much more of like informed by strength and conditioning and kind of sports science and less constantly varied and less on that end of the methodology and more in the structured end. And so, we spent a lot of time building education and trying to create sort of a format to help people. But, it's like we've had multiple iterations of courses and a classroom, like a subscription-based thing. And we've had all that. And then that whole time, we've also been building this sort of on-site kind of training camp presence where we bring, developing and aspiring CrossFit athletes in and start building them towards that sort of the pinnacle of this sport, which at this point still, I think, the CrossFit Games. But obviously, there's a lot of turmoil going on within. I don't know how.
What do you think on that?
You are in.
No, I just for like a little bit of like transparency, I kind of unplugged from the CrossFit stuff. We're in this like constant like headbutting with like CrossFit HQ, and we were in a completely different segment. When they asked me to come in and work with CrossFit, it was about like how to take CrossFit and use it for training athletes for sport, and the mission felt very, very well defined, and it was something well within my my wheelhouse. The ability to be able to like, all right, here's these various CrossFit movements. Let's say squat this and this, and like here's how you kind of adapt that, add to it, and kind of create the own methodology. And what was wild was anytime we said anything, it was like met with just this constant butting of the head. And I was always like, but I'm not in the fitness market where we're teaching professional coaches and people that own gyms. Because what we really saw too is when the NFL had their lockout, I think that was in 2009, professional athletes are walking into CrossFit gyms and I'm having people calling me on the phone and being like, dude, I got these pro football players here. What the fuck do I do?
What do I do with this?
Yeah. And so, that was kind of like shed a light that like people just didn't have an education base. They had a gym, they had a cool name, they knew some branding, but all of a sudden somebody comes in who's training for the known and knowable. And more importantly, like sport specific, like they needed, a training template or just a methodology for it and one that they could understand. You get in there and you start talking to CrossFitters about, building aerobic base and periodization in this, and all of a sudden their eyes go cross-eyed and you're like, all right, here's how you do this. And, but as we kind of grew and like the methodology and things kind of evolved, it was just like met with this like constant headbutting from CrossFit HQ. And I could never figure out why. And it just kind of culminated with us being like, you guys have gotten too weird, and you're complete Martians. Like you guys live in Mars, like we live on Earth. Like it just was like two different people. And then, as you know, I mean, you guys are kind of in a similar vein where you like deal with these people and you're like, I just can't physically deal with these, with this level of like insanity. So we peeled out and I kind of unplugged from the CrossFit market. And I was on that, Jed Linehart's podcast where he was asking me some questions about how CrossFit football started and, some of the original conversation I had with Glassman. And our intelligent branding guy and video guy decided to take some of those like small little micro clips, which ended up causing a bunch of just attention that I just never imagined that me telling a historical story from 17 years ago would like have sparked that much debate. And so because of that, I kind of got pulled back in. And as I got into it, I realized that the CrossFit Games is probably not the pinnacle for that thing. I mean, that Wadapalooza actually looks like a fun time where.
Yeah, Wadapalooza has become almost as big as the CrossFit Games in terms of the athletes or like the star power essentially that it attracts. I think the Rogue Invitational, honestly, is harder to qualify for than the CrossFit Games because they only take like 10 from their qualifier, and Rogue does such a fantastic job with the programming, the organization, the logistics, and the whole thing. Like they have really spent some time figuring out that just how to run a really good competition, and their payout is almost the same as the CrossFit Games. I think this year it may actually be bigger than the CrossFit Games.
Well, and they were running strongman events. I mean, Olympic lifting. I mean, they're kind of doing these and they're using these models. And so it's really gone into these. And I kind of always knew that it would, just because it's very difficult to, be everything to everybody. And you bring out these inside or outside organizations that can fundraise. They're not constrained with certain things. And, think that like looking at some of these like bigger events, they actually look a lot more fun than what I saw within the CrossFit Games, where all of a sudden you're like, wow, we're going to row a marathon. And I'm like, dude, like no.
What I like about some of the outside events, I think this is what really, really attracts me to them, is that they don't have to follow the CrossFit methodology. They don't have to be testing, work capacity across broad time and modal domain. They get to define what they're testing for. And Wadapalooza, they're a celebration of fitness. So they can kind of do their tests how they want to do their tests. Rogue is just, they're not affiliated with CrossFit when they put on the Rogue Invitational. They get to kind of choose something that showcases the athletes versus like the necessity to have, we have to have this ultra long endurance test. Not that there's anything wrong with long endurance tests. I've spent the 15 years that I've been involved in this, building enough aerobic capacity to be able to do those, because I was a sprint swimmer, and that was going from 19 seconds to 19 minutes, let alone an hour or an hour and a half, was a journey for me. I don't think there's anything wrong with testing those, but it doesn't have to be on a rower. We don't have to be doing a half marathon row or a marathon row. So many ways that you can test endurance capacity and not make it sitting on a fucking rower for 2 hours.
Well, we interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Are you a field or court sport athlete looking to dominate the leaderboard? Let me introduce you to Field Strong. Take your inner athlete to the next level by exposing yourself to the advanced training techniques that contributed to my 10 years in the NFL. Unlock pinnacle performance and level up your athletic potential today. Head to powerathletehq.com/fieldstrong and claim your 7-day free trial. Now back to the show. Well, and I feel like some of, and this is just purely from the outside. I mean, it was a terrible tragedy that happened with the CrossFit Games where the guy passed away. But also living in Texas, like there's just a lot of things that you don't do. And so I sometimes wonder if the desire to be unknown and unknowable. I mean, like if you look at like the rise of High Rocks, for example, which I watched some of the YouTube stuff on that. Oh, that looks awful. Like there's not a single ounce of me that would want to do that. I mean, these people were like running a 10K in this. I mean, it looks, not easy.
I'm doing my first one next weekend. Actually, there's a High Rocks in Atlanta, and I went and coached my wife and her friend did a partner one in Texas. Actually, it was in Dallas back in November, and I was like watching it and I was like, oh, I could do this. And then I got caught up in it. They got done and they're like, you should do the next one. And I'm
You're like,
like, okay,
yeah,
yeah,
no.
I'll do it. And then I signed up and I was like, oh, that means I have to run 8K.
Is that what it
Like,
is? Is it
yeah, it's
8K?
8K.
It's wall balls and like I saw a ski erg. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's the order is it's run, so it's always a run preceding a station, but then it's skier, sled push, sled pull, which everyone talks about how heavy the sleds are, but when I've watched higher level competitive CrossFitters go in and do it, they move those things pretty smoothly.
sure.
I think there's burpee broad jumps, which I think is a good if you're going to test burpees for like a really wide variety of fitness levels, that's probably your best option,
Sure.
right? Because it's easy judging standard and all that. And there's rowing in there, farmer's carry, which seemed like a complete waste of a station, should be a heavy sandbag carry. But
Sure.
I obviously have some biases, lunges and wall ball. So they've got I think it's 8 stations with a 1K run before every station.
So, and then like, what is it? Like sub 1 hour, I think is what they're shooting for.
Yeah, sub 1 hour is fast.
Oh, is it?
Anybody who's sub 60 is cooking on that.
Yeah. I think I was
that's like,
watching Tia
yeah, go
Claire
ahead.
Toomey do it. And I think like that was what her goal was sub 60 minutes. But I was like, fuck, that's a lot of work in 60 minutes.
I think they set the world record at the pairs or doubles or whatever it's called. I think they set the world record at like 55.
Yeah. That chick's a monster.
Yeah, she's insane.
Yeah.
I am always impressed by her longevity and just ability to continue to compete at an incredibly high level now across domains, right? Not just in CrossFit when it's unknowable, and she's been able to build this massive base and huge strength base and perfect Olympic lifting and a lot of the gymnastics that are tested. Now she's going out and doing high rocks and setting world records as well. So as a human, she is probably one of the most impressive female athletes I've ever witnessed.
This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show. Well, obviously this thing's continued to grow, but I feel like as these outside events, I mean, because really, CrossFit is two things, right? It's, down at your local CrossFit gym where you guys are, like training, let's say, moms and dad to be fit and, people that want to look good naked, like, which is my brothers go to a CrossFit gym and they like it because my brother's like, yeah, I can work out. So it pretty much allows me to eat whatever I want on the weekends and, be able to go put on some swing trunks and not look like an asshole on vacation. So that's his whole motivation for training, which is those individuals. But then there's this other cross section, which you guys are in, which is training people for these different events. And for a long time, the pinnacle was the CrossFit Games, but now these others have arisen, which I think only increases the visibility and actually makes it a lot more fun. Like just, I never went to Wadapalooza or any of these others, but like looking at the media and the capture, I mean, it looks like a fun event. It looks like a good time, and it kind of looks like a celebration of fitness where people are training and having a good time, and there's booths, and it just looks like something people would want to go to more so than like some weird baton death march, which was usually the CrossFit Games.
Yeah, the CrossFit Games always, I think, was like a war of attrition, where it really was just an endurance test across the 5 days or the 4 days or however long, sometimes 6 days when they decided to spread it out. I think some of these other events, there's now this World Fitness Project, which is like a whole subset where they've signed the 20 top male and female athletes, and they're doing a very similar circuit, which they've got 3 events this year, culminating in a World Championships in December I think they're in Denmark. And they also are putting on these events that seem like they're going to be able to showcase athletes. They're going to be able to really capture competitive fitness. And you're right. I think we've spent a lot of time really shifting from the training your average person. Although we have programs, of course, we obviously have programs to address that. But our specialty is working with competitive fitness athletes, fitness racers, whatever you want to call them, whatever this sport eventually evolves into, that's where we have spent our time, is building people towards that.
Do you think, CrossFit's obviously in turmoil right now? I mean, I saw that, obviously, Glassman sells, and now, they're
For sale again.
Yeah. So now they're up for sale again. I don't know who's going to necessarily dive in on that one unless it's at like a hell of a discount, I've always kind of imagined that at some point, CrossFit would be owned in some way through some crowdfunding. Like, somebody like a Rich Froning steps up and is like, hey, we're going to crowdfund this thing. And, everybody's going to be a shareholder in this, and we'll put a board together. That's kind of what I see as like the future for CrossFit. I don't see one person owning it. I see it kind of more in like a co-op in a lot of ways, when then at that point you probably elect a board and try to like develop this thing and continue to have it subsidized. Because I mean, people have gyms and there's still value in the name, but I think without some definite leadership, it just gets kind of a wordless kind of boat without a rudder.
I've always thought that there needs to be some separation between the sport, competitive fitness as a sport, which is currently called CrossFit, or it has been called colloquially CrossFit up to now, and the CrossFit methodology for fitness. I've never been a huge believer in the CrossFit methodology as a coach, or even for general pop fitness. I think there's other ways to address that. But I love the idea of the sport of racing fitness, and always have. And I've been doing it for 15 years. I've been to the games a couple of times, and coached plenty of athletes there. And I think that this sport, this won't die if CrossFit gets sold and goes somewhere else, because people love competing in weightlifting and gymnastics, and building this kind of like really well-rounded fitness. It's different than like a hybrid athlete who does high rocks, and I'm trying to be strong and have capacity. When you mix all that stuff, it's something different.
I fucking hate that term, hybrid athlete.
The hybrid athlete term.
Oh my God, dude. It's like for some reason on my Instagram feed, and this is my own fault. So I was out in California, went out to visit a guy who has a company called Stratosphere. And the Stratosphere is like a huge chamber. I'm going to have him on the podcast. But it's like a huge chamber, and it goes from like sea level up to like Everest Base Camp in this deal. Awesome. And you exercise inside of it. And so like you started base camp, and I was on like a bike, and then it went to like 6, and then it went to 4, then it went to 8. And it kind of like stair stepped up at like 2 minutes at each level. And then next thing you know, you're at 18,000 feet. And it's obviously less oxygen, but there's also pressure, or lack of pressure, I guess, as you go up. Right. So it's kind of pressurizes in weird ways, and you exercise. And it was pretty awful. So the guy that had done the research did a bunch of like neuro or physiological testing at Everest Base Camp, and they found all these physiological gene expression, I think is what they were calling it, that happens through this training. So we went to go check it out, and the one guy who said Hunter McIntyre, I guess, is a buddy of his, and so he's like, oh, he's the world's best hybrid athlete, and I think my phone heard that. And then it started kicking me out. All of these guys that are like, I can deadlift 500 and I can run a sub 5 minute mile, and I'm a hybrid athlete. And it's like, I guess it's lift heavy weights and run fast for distance, I guess. And
that's what it seems. That's what it seems to be.
Don't own a t-shirt. Yeah, and you don't own a t-shirt.
And you don't own a t-shirt.
Yeah, every one of these dudes.
Most CrossFitters also don't own t-shirts, so there's that as well. So
yeah, well, I
actually just think about 2 years ago just found my first t-shirt. So
yeah, this is before it was sleeves off, but man, that hybrid thing has. But like anytime you kind of put these tags on to different people, whether it be hybrid athlete, this and this, there needs to be something to train to be able to compete for it, which for me has always been great. Like if there's something to compete at, like I think there's a training system. The issue, and this is some of the stuff that we got into with CrossFit, is like training for fitness is so arbitrary. Like I've always believed fitness to be very personal. The fitness that one person needs is another. I mean, my mom in her 80s, like her level of fitness that she needs involves like walking. And so, she's fit enough to do the things that she is, and to be able to kind of paint this broad brush and say, well, here's a level of fitness that everybody needs. I think it's very, very specific, and it's very, very self-serving. And like you brought up a good point, like for most people, and like even dudes over the age of 40, like lifting some heavy weights, max motor unit recruitment, building a big aerobic base, not eating like an asshole, and probably monitoring your calories and making sure you're getting blood work is probably a better recipe than high intensity, movements to failure done on a 2-on 1-off schedule.
My wife does a lot of nutrition coaching. That's her thing. And she works with a lot of people that are, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And a lot of them come in from, because of where we're positioned, they come in from CrossFit gyms. And a lot of them, they want better body composition. They want to just feel fit. They want they want to focus on longevity, but they're doing CrossFit 5 days a week, or, the local box class 5 days a week. And one of the first things she does is pull them back and give them just some classic strength training, almost bodybuilding-esque style strength training. And after a couple of weeks, they're like, man, my joints feel better and my body composition's improving. Oh, and she gets them to walk. That's the other one. Like you had said, she gets them, gets them walking. And it's like, man, I wish that there was a better understanding of how to leverage intensity. Intensity is important, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you're trying to build high level world class fitness, then intensity is like probably one of the most important levers that you have. But if you really want just, broad, general longevity style fitness, intensity is like, it's like the sprinkle.
Yes.
It's like the icing on the top of the cake, but the cake is built on, like you had said, building a really big aerobic base, spending a lot of time strength training, maybe even focusing on some hypertrophy style training, because as we age, we do lose muscle mass.
Yeah.
And just classic like low rep, low volume, heavy load strength training isn't necessarily gonna build that for you. And then I think on the top is the necessity for a little bit of sprint training, especially since you were talking about gene expression. It really does activate some genes that are important for longevity and anti-cancer, tumor necrosis factors and things like that. So the intensity is important. Like you still got to sprinkle it on there, but it shouldn't be a program built around intensity unless you're trying to compete in something.
Sure. No, dude, I always have felt that, like the icy river of like, like, can I cross is sprinting? And I you run into people and ask them, when they start training, like, when was the last time you sprinted? And if they can't tell me, I'm like, dude, like the day that I can't go out and sprint and run, like that's kind of the day where I've crossed that river a little bit, and the guy's coming to pick me up in the boat. And like it doesn't have to be like dry land or flat ground. You could still do hill sprints or even heavy sled pushes, where now there's no eccentric load and you can start kind of managing that stuff. But I think at some point that ability to the coordination and the strength, the eccentric load is so vital. I mean, in some of our earlier strength training programs and our linear progressions that we use with kind of beginners, one of the key elements is they got to be able to go sprint. And it's not like going out and running 16 110s or any conditioning stuff. It's like, I need 4 to 7 good reps of max effort sprinting, full recovery, where you can go out and run as fast as you can and actually use that strength that you've developed in a meaningful and interesting way.
What's really interesting is this is something that I've kind of run into myself. I just finished 8th in the age group qualified for the CrossFit Games. They'll finish the video review on the 21st, but for all intents and purposes, I qualified, 8th overall in 40 to 44. So I'm fit by the CrossFit definition, right? But I was just talking to my wife right after we finished the age group qualifier, and I was like, man, I don't think I can sprint. Like I legit go out and just, hey, run a 40 for me. I don't think that I can open up fully without, there's too much risk for my hamstrings and my adductors for me to be able to go do that right now, because it's been too long. And so while on this one hand, I'm by all definitions fit, right? Like deadlift well into the 500s, back squat 475. I can run a sub 530 mile. My 5K is around 20 minutes. Like I'm pretty fit for a 40-year-old. Just turned 40. So I'm up there. Clean 375, snatched, 285. Like I got the metrics, but then I can't even sprint. I was a sprint swimmer. There's no chance that I could go in the water and like truly open up without blowing out a shoulder. I couldn't go out right now or get on I've got an assault runner sitting in the room right over there. I couldn't go on there and just truly open up and not have a serious risk of popping something. So I think, CrossFit always talks about their definition of fitness and, work capacity across broad time and modal domain, and that CrossFit crowns the fittest, but I can't sprint. And so that's a huge problem. And I actually want to address that. That's one of the things that I've been talking about addressing, is just because it's not tested in my sport doesn't mean that I shouldn't be doing it. And I definitely want to start to bring back some sprinting. And funny enough, you mentioned prowler pushes. That's like kind of where I'm going to start, is either some sled drag or some sled push sprint type stuff. But just from my own experience, I got to keep the volume low, because those adductors, man, for me, it's the adductors that go when I start layering it back in.
Man, no, it's so I do jiu-jitsu a couple days a week, and I train some of the top jiu-jitsu players in the world. And so bringing those guys in and training them and putting them into a model that allows them to foster and develop athleticism and come up. But one of the reasons that I think I like jiu-jitsu, and more importantly, why I show up to train, is whenever we do any of the warm up in the morning, or like when we first get there, we do like a little bit of after we always run. So we the mats are pretty big. So, I mean, it's, not massive, but it's probably 15, 20 yards in each direction. And so, and the mats are a little springy, right? So they're not like hard, but they got a little bit of give to them, and you're barefoot. And so what I'll do is I kind of sprint as fast as I can, plant, and then I run as fast as I can down. And it's kind of my marker for everything. So I show up and I am happy to go to jiu-jitsu. It's fun. I thought, there's good community, and I like battling people, but it's actually the sprinting at the front part that is why I'm there. And every time I get done with it, I'm like, not today, Satan. Not today, old age. I beat you another day. I still got it. And people always be like, dude, you're pretty fast. I'm like, I know, I'm good. I think that there'll be a day that I'll go in there and I won't be able to sprint. And, but it's always this interesting check in my mind where I'm like, all right, and I put my foot in the ground and I run as fast as I can, slow down and decelerate, and then plant and go the other way. And, cause everybody's always kind of shortening it. And I sprint these squares, and it's so stupid. And it's only in my mind. And I'm sure people are like, this big fucking idiot, why is he running so fast? But it's a check mark for me. I mean, playing football, I played against a lot of dudes, and I remember guys coming in that benched, 600 pounds, and this guy's going to do this. Your ability to go from point A to point B with the max velocity and get there and break, be able to move and read and react, that is what allows you to play that sport. And you're, and if you're slow, you're not there. I mean, so it's sprinting and running and doing those things through, even as much as I'd like to lift weights and do all this shit, that to me is the ultimate trump card. You watch somebody sprint.
That's the ultimate test of athleticism.
It
right?
Is.
That is the pinnacle of athleticism. I always took a lot of pride in my vertical jump, because as a sprint swimmer, that the start is it's 30. It determines 33% of finish order. If you break down.
Oh, where you're out of the blocks.
Yes, your time to 15 meters is basically it determines about 33% of finish order in the 50 freestyle. So the bigger your vertical jump, the more momentum you're carrying into the water, the faster you're going to hit the water. More speed you're carrying when you break out all of it. So I always took a lot of pride in that. I had a day-to-day 37, 38-inch vertical jump, and at one point I trained it up to 39. And now, as I'm starting to, this was my point of pride. And now, as I'm starting to get just a little bit older and dampened from doing more of the endurance work and stuff that's been required to be competitive here, I'm starting to see that fade. And the other day I did a max vert test. It was 34, and I could not, I think I probably took 15 attempts. I was 34 is bullshit. I'm a 36 on a bad day, and there was nothing I could do. And that 34 is my best out of them. I was shit, I'm losing it.
But no, it's pretty interesting. And if you go back, and I know you did all your master's work, but if you go back and you look at Zadaskorsky's, science and practice, he has a really interesting part in there where he talks about using, submaximal GPP conditioning circuits as kind of a prelim, kind of a preparatory phase to be able to go into more advanced training. I mean, it was building metabolic pathways and preparing tendons and tissues for this, but there was a block. And in there was like one little passage where he said, if you extend it too far, where you get into like too much time domain and you kind of lean too heavy in this, the body has a conversion of fast twitch muscle fibers to these kind of like medium slow twitch muscle fibers so that you can handle more load. So like it's just in a preparatory phase, but it has to be, looked at as this like little thing that you use in the beginning, but then you get into more advanced, because those are the ones that you have to protect, those ones that allow you to jump high. In this, I mean, there's probably a good reason for the fact that like, if your vert was still as high as it was, you probably wouldn't have the ability to be able to do what you are doing, which is like the high rocks and some of these longer events. But I mean, what's still impressive though, and this is what I've never been able to figure out, is knowing that little bit of physiology, these guys still come in and have like a 365 clean, which it's impossible to clean a weight slowly. I mean, you can squat slow, like you can't jump up on a box slow, and you sure as hell can't clean a weight slow. So like, like the barbell lifts and, like back squat, like I'm sure you've seen people back squat heavy and it's like, fuck dude, that just took you 6 seconds. But like when you watch these guys clean, or like they do, max effort box jump, there's no way to do that stuff slowly. So when I started looking at kind of like programming, like how do you know that the programming, like what type of North stars are you looking for? And it was just always movements that you could never do slow. Like you can't swing a heavy kettlebell slow. You got to have a fast turnaround. I mean, so some of these things kind of like, like the burpee broad jump, I was watching people do that, and some people were like popping right up and jumping and it looked good. And other people like looked like they were just hurling their dead body through space. And I was like,
watching that station, there was such a dichotomy. It was clear the people who were fit enough and had trained, and they were flying, right? Covering good ground, dropping right in, falling into the next one. And then there were the people that were like slow crawling up and down from the burpee. And then their jump was like 4 inches.
Yeah.
And then they would stand there and you could just see the grief on their face.
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm not even done with the first one yet. But okay, so you mentioned something. You mentioned, the ability to clean heavy and this vertical jump. This was years ago now. I want to say this was like 2016 or 2017, but we had one of our games prep camps, and we coached. It had to be 2017 or maybe 2018 because Noah was part of the group. But Noah Olson, who legendary CrossFitter, been on the podium a handful of times, games I think 10 years in a row. He came and he was at the camp, and one of the things we did vertical jump testing, and his vertical jump, I think if I'm remembering correctly,
it was like 18 inches.
29 inches.
Oh, 29.
Right. So it's
pretty
not
good.
terrible.
Yeah.
It's not terrible.
Yeah.
But 29, but like for reference, Travis Mayer was like 36, right? And so there was this huge gap in between there. And then I watched him clean 355, literally like 45 minutes later. It's crazy. So, so little power relative to someone like Travis or some of the more explosive athletes in the sport, but somehow, and part of it's limb length, Noah has shorter limbs for sure. And speed under the bar and things like that. And speed under the bar and concentric speed are not necessarily the same thing.
Sure.
But it was crazy to watch that lack of explosiveness relative to the other athletes. And then he goes and cleans the exact same thing. It was crazy to watch.
Well, I mean, but he, I don't know what his training history was before CrossFit. So I'm always fascinated when I see CrossFit athletes. I always like to know, like, what did they do before this? For example, one of my favorites is when we were at the CrossFit Games years ago and they put that zigzag run in. And you could see that, like, there were girls that were, high-level soccer players and rugby and this, and those girls were tearing it up. And then poor Kalipa goes out there and almost breaks his legs because he just had never done anything like that. Like he was, out of shape, got into CrossFit, had this big motor. And it's pretty interesting now that he's kind of phased out. And I know he does a bunch of jits. He's come and trained with us a few times. And I think like that has become something like his ability to move through space. But it was always very apparent when we went to go teach seminars, you watch the games, you could see the people that had an athletic background going into this, and they just moved better. And it's because it's very difficult to replicate those, neuromuscular pathways and just that coordination from a young age of playing sports, and then they ported it over. It's like, the CrossFit girls that come in and they're like, oh, I was a high-level gymnast. And you're like, well, this is going to be an easier deal than somebody
this is a lot easier. Well, now we're in the phase where people started CrossFit when they were 10 or 12, and so their sport history is CrossFit.
What do you think of that?
So I have a handful of thoughts on that. One of the challenges that I've had with those athletes, I have one who started when she was 12. We went to the CrossFit Games at 14, 15, 16, 17. So she, I mean, she was good. Still is. But what I found is now that she's transitioned, she's I think 23 now. Now she's transitioned into the open division. The challenge that we've had is that she has the strength metrics that are required. Her gymnastics in the sport are fantastic. Her ability to learn skills is excellent because CrossFit is a skill-based learning sport. But her aerobic base just isn't the same as the athletes who played soccer or played a field sport or did, whatever high school sport it may have been. She just didn't do that. She was doing the GPP, the Metcons, and things like that to prepare for the CrossFit Games. And so she missed, and this is my own fault. And now I know this as a coach, but I was like so focused on getting her there and being competitive at that age that I missed this really important component of long-term development. And I'm not saying we didn't do any aerobic development, but there's a big difference between, training and being able to run as a female, like a 20-minute 5K coming out of high school and running a 24-minute 5K and being 22 or 23 and having to work your way down to 20 minutes while maintaining all of this, this strength and capacity, and can't get down there by losing body weight.
Yeah.
Because you have to maintain your current, weight level. So I think there's that. And more I'm seeing the same thing happen over and over and over. The things that they seem to lack are power output on the ergs, like really high power output stuff on the Echo bike. Their 500-meter rows are just not as competitive because they haven't done explosive high power work as a young athlete coming up. They did a lot of Olympic weightlifting and strength training, but they missed that power output domain, the sprinting, right? The things that you develop from sprinting and extended sprinting and sprint intervals. They missed that because they were learning skills and building capacity and building endurance and building strength, just missing that whole pathway of sprinting and power. And so it's been consistent across the board. Whenever I see these athletes, they're always missing the same things. They're missing like low end aerobic development and the high end power. And it's on the ergs or running and more in the cyclical domains than it is that they're missing strength or even coordination. A lot of people look at CrossFitters and like, oh, well, they're not good athletes. These people who started young, they've built such a variety of skills. They're fairly athletic at this point. They just miss that power domain.
Well, I mean, if you think about an athletic template, like if you were working with those younger athletes, there would almost be like a block within there that was playing sports. So like, obviously they're coming and training in and you're like, all right, like if we break this thing into a year, maybe 1 to 2 days a week, there's going to be pickup basketball or as much as my kids, so like my kids play sports, but then like in their off seasons and even, so my one daughter plays on a club basketball team because basketball's out of season. So she has to go to the PE first thing in the morning and they bitch about it nonstop. I always ask them like, what are you guys playing today? Oh, we're playing this. And so they just basically learn these different sports. And then what's funny is my daughter plays soccer, but she still has to go to PE and then she has to do soccer after school. And she was having like a panic attack because they were doing a beep test. And yeah, so she was like,
my kids hate the beep test.
Oh my God. She was like in full panic mode. And I keep telling her, I'm like, some of the best athletes in the world have failed at this. Like you have to go out there and just like embrace the suffering a little bit. Like this is this weird thing that you get into it. And I think like, shared suffering is great. And I'm like, you're not going to believe me. As long as you're not the last person, are you going to be last? She's like, no. I'm like, all right, as long as you beat one person, it's kind of like if we're all running and there's a lion chasing us, I just got to run faster than the slowest dude.
Yeah, they're only going to catch one.
Yes,
and one. So.
That's what I told her. I'm like, just don't be last. Whatever you have to do. But then they go out and they, here in Texas, it's kind of cool this time of year in the morning, but in the afternoons, it's like fucking devil's anvil. And I'm watching these girls out there play soccer, and like I can see how red she is from like across the field. And like in my head, I'm thinking, this is the best thing I've ever seen, for the fact that like there's no way to replicate this. As an adult, you're like, at 4:30 in the afternoon, I'm going to go run around for 90 minutes trying to play soccer. Like that's not going to happen. So like you would like at 12 and 13, that's the only time this is stuff. And then my other daughter plays basketball, and she plays on this club team, and this coach is a psycho. Like it's like 5 nights a week. And then they got tournaments on the weekends. They have open gym. I mean, it's like to the point where I like want to go talk to this dude, and I'm like, I realize that like this is your job, but like 5 nights a week for a 13-year-old girl to play basketball. Like, I realized that like this is what people do here in Texas, but it just feels unsustainable. But it's kind of what they do. But I also love it. I'm like, dude, this, like, there's no time in your life where you're going to be able to do this other than right at this moment. As an adult, I mean, as a professional athlete, I was very fortunate to do it, and like, you know, like for what you guys do. But for the average person, there's no way that they're going to be able to dedicate your life to training.
No, I remember the first time I qualified for the games was on a team, and we were doing team training at a field in the middle of the summer, and it was like noon, and I was like, my God, this is recess. Like, look at my life right now.
Yeah.
I'm out here, like we're literally just playing on a field at noon for 2 hours. Like, I couldn't ask for a better. I'm 37 and I'm out here playing. Like, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. You brought up such a good point that with those athletes, when they're playing, when they're out playing soccer, or I remember playing ultimate frisbee even in swimming, there's no time that you run faster than when you're trying to chase down the frisbee or chase down the ball, or chase down the person in front of you. And there's no drills that you do that get you that close to that. And do it on a cadence that's that fast, where the rest intervals are that tight, and you're not feeling ready, but that person's going, and you better get after them. And I think that's what the people who start CrossFit at 10 or 12 miss. Now, I also think that, there's some value in learning some of these things, like learning the Olympic lifts at 12 or 13. There isn't anything wrong with that. I know that there's definitely people out there that will push back on that statement, but I don't think there's anything wrong with learning the Olympic lifts young. And
it's kind of interesting. Like, Olympic lifts go through this like interesting wave, and like you know this with doing your master's work and like all the stuff you did in college sports, that there was this kind of prevailing attitude that if you didn't Olympic lift, you were like leaving a lot of like athleticism and skill development on the table. And I remember when I came to college at Berkeley, my original strength coach, guy named Eric Cohen, who was a real switched on dude. He kind of had almost like a hybrid program where it was a little bit of powerlifting, the power variations for obviously the pulls, and then he ends up getting fired, and they brought in a guy named Todd Rice, and Todd was a pure Olympic lifting coach. Like, he had been to Bulgaria. I mean, he's shown us videos of like Bulgarians that he had hand done. I mean, was like, our program was like front squat, snatch, clean and jerk, and like overhead press and GHD back extensions. Like, that was our program.
Oof.
And so I had squatted like 6'10" when I was 19, and I was on pace to bench 500 pounds. And he's like, you don't get to bench anymore, and you will not back squat. So I front squatted, ended up front squatting 500, but I'd go down to the rec center, and we go down there and bench because I still wanted to bench 500. But it was like front squat, snatch, clean and jerk, press, and then like obviously we did a ton of stuff on the GHDs. And that was our program. It was Olympic lifting. I mean, we did plyometrics, we jumped. I mean, great program. And for that time in my life, it was exactly what I needed. And, but there was this attitude that, like, if you can't pull a bar with, force and triple extension, you're never going to be able to translate that in. And then all of a sudden I get drafted to go to the NFL, and nobody Olympic lifted. It was like, I watched one dude in a set of cleats with spikes get on a platform, and I watched him reverse curl 315 for like 2 reps. And like, that was in my 10 years. I never saw anybody Olympic lift. So, I would Olympic lift and, in the off season go train, but like, got into a lot more like dynamic pulling and a little bit more of like, band and this, and like, there just was like some other things, and, started leaning more on like plyometrics and jumps. And I realized that like the plyometrics were by far a much better bridge between the weight room and the field than Olympic lifting. And the other
if you think about the strength curve, right? If you just think about the strength curve, of course, Olympic lifting is going to be of course, plyometrics are going to be much closer to what you're doing on the field than taking 400 pounds from the hang and trying to put it in front rack.
Yeah.
I think there's so much to be said for that. But also at the same time, like you were saying, the time that you spent Olympic lifting also probably built that part of the strength curve that allowed you to express more of it in plyometrics later on too.
Well, I mean, for me, it was the right point. So I've always seen the value in Olympic lifting, but I've also seen incredible athletes that never Olympic lifted. So and this is what I said, it kind of goes to this ebb and flow where, all of a sudden CrossFit comes out and there's this prevailing attitude that like, if you want to be an athlete and you want to be elite, there has to be Olympic lifting. And I was like, I didn't pull a bar off of the ground for almost my entire 10 years. I only did heavy RDLs were my pulls. Like I didn't deadlift for the entirety of my NFL career, and ended up I think I had like a 500-pound RDL for a set of 8 to 10 reps. And so like for me, that actual like top down loading, eccentric load to concentric and that fast turnaround was by far a better movement than actually statically pulling a weight off the ground. But like it just was like within this development stuff, and you kind of see it now. And right now, like Olympic lifting, I feel like is taking a bit of shelling, in terms of like, oh, you don't need to Olympic lift to develop athletes. I'm like, it's true. It's one tool in the toolbox, but that's going to be predicated on how developed they are. I would much rather have somebody, not Olympic lift if it looks like fucking stir-fried dog shit. And I used to watch a lot of guys Olympic lift poorly, and I was like, I don't see the value in this for you. So the time and effort that it takes for me to develop the proficiency with you learning to pull a bar, we could spend other ways. Now, if you can do this, and this is something that you're proficient at and it looks good, and we can actually, use it as intended, I think it fits within the model very well. But I feel like, and where I'm trying to get to, is that exposure has to come at a young age. For me, we did some, basically some, power cleans, power snatches as part of, bigger, faster, stronger in high school. And then when I came to college at 18, like we learned the lifts, and like I did them all through college. So it was something that we were proficient at. All of a sudden somebody at age, 30 that wants to come in an Olympic lift, I'm like, not to say you can't, but this would have been a lot easier to teach you at 12, 13, 14. So I think for a lot of these kids that are coming in, teaching them the bar pathway and teaching them to pull a bar in Olympic lift makes a lot of sense as a skill development for a kid. I just don't know if that ability to do it is still the same later in life, just because, owning a gym, I've tried to teach people to Olympic lift later in life, and it just feels like just fucking ice skating uphill.
To me, it's almost that if you're not going to compete in a sport that uses the Olympic lifts, and like you said, you're beyond, but just the learning age, that 12 to kind of 15, 12 to 18 window. There are other tools that we have in the toolbox that can essentially tap into the same parts of the strength curve that can achieve the same outcomes that don't require all the learning. Because think about how long you would have to spend with someone, say a 22, 25-year-old, where you could be just doing clean high pulls, which takes you 4 sessions to teach them to execute fairly efficiently. But the turnover on a clean or a squat clean, a full clean, like to teach them all of the components and probably build all the mobility that's required to get into a front rack effectively and all that. That is a month-long process where you're going to be using empty bars, and you're going to be using 75, 95 pounds, maybe 135, when you could be having them do clean high pulls at 225 pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And getting essentially all the explosiveness and all of the stimulus that you want from the Olympic lifts in something that you could teach within a session. I completely agree. And you could do it with plyometrics immediately, or loaded plyometrics immediately, or accommodating resistance.
Yeah.
Like they already know how to back squat. Let's do some reverse bands back squat and teach you how to jump out of the hole.
Yeah. I think that the CrossFit methodology was so rigid in these days, and it's kind of evolved, like you're saying, you bring in people that actually, have a strength conditioning background and see these deals and be like, all right, if this is rate of force development, there's some really cool jiggy ways on us to develop it that don't involve Olympic lifting shitty. But I did want to kind of pivot back a little bit. Like you brought in a really interesting point about developing energy systems. That kind of like athletic development model in terms of these kids getting exposed. I mean, like, and you actually said, like we made some mistakes. Like, how has that changed in 10 years? I mean, is it something where like now if you had a 12-year-old kid, you're like, hey, we're going to teach you the lifts, we're going to teach you this, but we still need to develop some of those, physiological pathways that come from, sports and just like you said, going outside and running for an hour, chasing a ball.
Yeah. I think that if I could do it again, now I primarily work with older athletes now. I haven't had another young or like teen athlete come across the plate that, had that level of talent. But I would definitely encourage them to go and join their high school sports teams. I would definitely encourage them. One of them would be swimming because swimming is such an important component in CrossFit. I would say, hey, if they're in high school, I would say, hey, go out for your high school swim team and tell them you want to swim the 200s. 200s are a grindy event. It's like basically running the 800-meter in track.
Well,
And
with swimming, the one thing that actually both my daughters swam, and I had them do it when they were younger, just to the fact that the amount of volume that they can handle in the water because of the unweightedness in this, like, would absolutely shatter you into a million pieces if it was ground based. Like my one, and this is Texas fucking weird club stuff, but like my daughter was 11 and she was in the pool for, I think it was like 90 minutes, 5 days a week, and then they had swim stuff on the weekends.
That's pretty typical swim volume.
But I mean, for her, like, she just like, I think it was too much, like, cause, every time we walked in there, the chlorine was so strong that when she'd walk in there, she's like, I feel like I'm going to be sick. And I was like, so do you want to try something else? And we ended up going and doing jits and basketball and trying some other things. But I'm glad that she got that early exposure, because I kept telling her, I'm like, there's no way that you're going to be able to have this level of exposure to volume at such a young age unless it's in the water. And I'm sure you've seen this too. Some of the high level, like I worked with China Cho. I mean, she was a high level swimmer, and like her ability to be able to suffer and handle volume was really impressive. And I always go back to the fact that she swam when she was younger. I mean, like you said, 3 hours in the pool, there's no way to mimic that.
Yeah, I mean, college swimming for us was 2.5 hours in the morning. We had an hour and a half dry land session in the middle of the day, which was plyos, and basically it was a strength and conditioning program that you
Shocker.
basically just described for your um, for your college experience. And then we had another 2 to 2.5 hours in the afternoon, and that was 5 days a week, and then we had a 3 hour session on Saturday morning. And that's just I think about that, and there's not even couldn't even come close to that, even in a mixed modal sport like CrossFit, where we can use ski ergs and bike ergs and things like that. Like, you couldn't fill that much time in it's 6.5 hours of training, and like all of it was active training versus 6.5 hour practice window where you might be training and resting and training and resting. Like, we were going, even the sprinters, we were it was a lot of volume there. So there's something to be said for that. But I think part of the reason that I would choose swimming for them is because it does really target that sort of that metabolic pathway that just doesn't get touched in CrossFit, that 800-meter run, 200-meter freestyle zone, where if you're training for that, man, it's painful. And there's no other way to do it unless you're out. Like, I think soccer players do a great job of it. A lot of the rugby players that I've coached, people that were, played rugby and now they're CrossFitters, they have whatever that metabolic pathway is. I don't know if you want to call it VO2 or lactate tolerance, the one that kind of splits between there, like the anaerobic endurance, that one that's in that wedge. Those are the athletes that have it when they start, and I don't have to spend time building it. They've already done it.
I think it's mental. I really do.
Could be.
I think like I dated a girl in college who was a All-American 800-meter runner, and her ability to just like mentally turn off and grind was like nothing I've ever seen. And I think it became from that deal. It was different than the people that ran the mile, the 400. I think there's just certain mindsets that like just dig in on that stuff, and I think the 800-meter is one of those. I mean, it's the same thing in football. I mean, and swimming, whatnot. Like, there becomes like just a certain mindset where, I always have people ask me like, how did you survive those hits? And I'm like, well, I was little and I took those hits, and then I just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the hits got more. So it was like a linear progression. You almost like overload the system. Whereas if you just took somebody and you dropped them into the hit, they get wrecked. But like your body,
that would break me right now.
Yeah,
If I took one of those, it would completely break me.
Yeah, it would break. But like that was just like you were little. It was kind of the Milo Bulls theory, where like, Milo picked up the calf, and as the calf got bigger, and he just got bigger too. And I think that is a great analogy for the training. Like, and this is what I was telling my daughters. I'm like nobody's going to expect you to be an Olympian today, but like, that's why there's this little progression. And I think what's so fascinating with the CrossFit stuff, especially getting these younger kids, because I think it was one of the last seminars we taught for CrossFit football was at CrossFit Mayhem. And one of the kids that was in the seminar was a kid, I think was a high school kid, who had never really done anything athletic, saw Froning, got into CrossFit, homeschooled, and all he did was train. And we put him in the seminar, and he had missed an entire block of athletic development that was like dramatically apparent. Like couldn't change direction, couldn't do anything, but could thruster his ass off and do all these different movements. And one of my recommendations is like you need to go play a club team and develop this. Well, but I want to be a high level CrossFitter. I'm like, at some point, this thing's going to evolve past thrusters and pull-ups, and it's going to get into.
We're starting to see it now.
Yeah, I mean, which is what I think this thing. And I always felt that it was so young and it was so strangleholded, CrossFit had such a stranglehold on like this sport of fitness and sport of like movement and like whatever you want to call it. Like I think what was the one that you shot up the World Fitness Project. Like that to me is a more intelligent deal where now we're going to test, use fitness as this kind of almost like interchangeable word for just like physical capacity or just physical prowess. And I always felt that like, CrossFit, was so like it always had to be some like baton death march is what I used to just call it. Like who can survive to the end, who's the person, but yet it didn't necessarily favor the best athlete or the best skilled. It was just the guy who could fucking suffer the most.
Yeah, it's always been this way as far back as I can remember. But basically, it's been they say they want to test work capacity across broad time and modal domain, and they have all of their 9 foundational skills and all of that, and then it is this war of attrition. It's just who can handle the most suffering across the weekend. One of the things I think that the World Fitness Project has gotten right is they're doing 2-day events instead of 5-day events, and I think they're only doing six competitive events across the 2 days. So it's a much lower total volume, and it allows people to actually express their capacity in each of the tests. And so you're going to see a better representation of what these athletes are actually capable of doing, rather than because in reality, the strategy, and this is something it took me a long time to learn as a sprint swimmer, because every time I would go out, it was like maximal effort, 20-second, and now I rest for 6.5 hours and then do another 20-second effort again. So it's like each one can be truly max effort, versus CrossFit, where basically I'm just trying to stay right under the threshold, right under red line for every event. And so my goal as an athlete competing in these 3 or 4 day, 9 event competitions is basically never to cross over and actually like hit my true potential. Because if I do, then each event, subsequent to that is going to suffer. And so I think with some of these new projects, like Wadapalooza shifted to a 2-day format this year. And so the athletes could really go out there and showcase themselves. WFP's shifted to this 2-day format. I'm not saying there can't be an event like the CrossFit Games that is meant to be a war of attrition type test, but I think this new evolution is going to be really good to allow fitness testing. Like you said, fitness is a good word to talk about capacity-based testing.
And it's also safer.
Absolutely.
I mean, which at 100%. Which at the end of the day, if you go out and you play with your buddies, you want everybody to come home. And I think CrossFit, in their desire to, either edginess or test this, they put the athletes in a lot of kind of sticky situations. I remember the year we were in, Santa Monica, they took those guys out there and were asking them, and I grew up in Southern California. So spent my entire life at the beach, and, there's a program called Junior Lifeguards. So 9 years old, you start, and it's basically you go to the beach and you kind of like apprentice as like a lifeguard, and you open water swim in this, and you just it's just what we did. And over the course of many years of going to the beach, I still go to the beach and can swim in this, but people that aren't from that part of the world and aren't exposed to the ocean, they get themselves in trouble real fucking quick. So then all of a sudden you take a bunch of guys from the Midwest that didn't grow up in Southern California and you ask them to go swim in Santa Monica. That was a recipe. And I remember when they did it, I was like, this is a terrible idea. Just asking people to swim in some weird 75-degree lake in Texas. There's just, and I know what they're doing. They're thinking oh, these guys are professional athletes, unknown, unknowable. But at the end of the day, you have a, responsibility to, because here's the problem. Athletes are going to be dumb. I same deal. Oh, John, you broke your leg. Can you play next week? Sure. If I can run, I'll fucking do it. Yeah, I'm on it. Let's go. And so you just had heat stroke. You good to compete the next event? You were. I don't know if you've watched any of the videos of Murph from the games for I want to say it was 2017, where people were blacking out. They had people that were cramped up and still
Like they were like this and still running all the way through the finish line. I think it was Cara Sanders
Yeah.
that did it. It's one of the most impressive feats of like human will that I've seen, but it's not safe or healthy or good
Or sustainable.
competition.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of ego on that side of it, whereas I tend to look at it like, you know, athletes can be dumb, and if there's money involved and there's pride, we used to joke, dude, that like money, food, and shame are like the three motivators in life. And especially for guys, like if there's something that involves physical shame, or maybe like there's money on the line, or like if there's a meal or a food or we're competing, like fucking people cut their legs out, like people go out, you know, and do whatever they can for money, food, and shame. And so looking at this thing, like I always felt like a sense of nervousness, at least for me, whenever I watched CrossFit Games. I'm like, oh shit, dude, like are the, you know, I hope everybody comes back. And then they had that issue where the guy didn't. And I was always like, dude, they have been so close so many times, putting these athletes in bad situations that, you know, something bound to happen. And so I was happy to see some of these other events were almost like putting the athlete first and athlete centric, and trying to give them the chance to showcase their skills in the best light and in safe ways that allows them to be successful and, you know, be able to go home at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm always trying to think about how do we create a system for I'm a systems guy, right? So I'm trying to think like how do we create a system for evaluating a competition? And if you think about what should be at the top, right? It's not what is a good spectacle. It's not what showcases the athletes the best. It's athlete safety. Number one is the event structure that we're creating safe for the athletes, and then everything else falls into place afterward. But that's got to be the number one consideration here, because if the athletes aren't safe, people aren't going to continue. There's no reason to continue except for money, like you said, and people will, as you said, cut their legs off for money.
Yeah.
And I think that I hope that some of these newer events and some of these events that are adjacent to CrossFit do a much better job of respecting the athletes' safety first, and then we can start to figure out how to create a spectacle within that, because that's I think that's in the end what really matters. And also, if you know, we want to talk about some of the problems that have existed with CrossFit. I think the number one problem is that they have this confusion between a sport and a training system. And I want to just hang out over here in the sport and coach people in competitive fitness. So whatever that looks like, wherever we go with that, I think that's where I will be. But with this other thing, this training system, I think there needs to be some differentiation. And also, if you think about it from like a governing body perspective, what governing body says like, hey, we define what training for the sport is, and we define what the sport is? Like, what governing body does that? It's not like the NFL is like, this is how you train NFL and this is the sport NFL.
No, it just, you know, in all my years, nobody ever asked me what I benched. Like, it wasn't like I walked out on the field and was like, what'd you bench? All right, we win. Like, it was like, okay, could you, and the analogy I give is I spent the entire off season sharpening my blade so that when I went to cut, I was as lethal as I could be. It was as smooth and as fast and as sharp as possible. So whenever people asked me about my training, I was like, you know, I had my own training metrics. I knew that there were certain movements that I had to hit that I, you know, but it was a historical deal. Over the course of my training career, I knew that there were certain movements and certain things that I did that I knew in my mind, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm back to my strength level. And then at that point, I didn't ever push past it, because the amount of time and effort that it would take to add to those things took away from the skill development piece. And it was almost like 10 pull-ups with 90 pounds between my waist. It was, I would do 5 sets of 5, a 405 bench, 495 squat, and I had to do that in sub 20 minutes. So I'd set the clock and I would do 5, and I'd just keep going back and forth, and I had to get that done in 20 minutes. There was like some sprint stuff, and I just had these like little checks that when I hit those, I was like, all right, I'm good. And all I had to do at that point was just kind of like maintain. And just because the amount of time that it took me to push past it just took away from the skill development aspect. And I ended up figuring that out in, I think it was either in Verkhoshansky's book, where he talked about like the ideal strength for like a thrower was like a 200 kilo bench press, that the time and effort that it took for them to get to 230 took away from the skill development and actually slowed down the rate of force on the ball. And so I kind of took that piece and I was like, all right, I'm going to develop my own metrics. And I think that's what's so fascinating, especially for what you guys are doing, because you're talking about a concurrent training system and like a concurrent training model where, you got to be fast, right? You got to be explosive. You got to be able to be proficient in these movements, but then you also have to be able to keep in like the back of my pocket, like it might be a fucking marathon on a rower. So like, like that, but then again, like if you think about spectator, and this is where CrossFit Games, I think, lost a lot of people, is it has to be fun for the people who are watching who don't do the training. Like that's what's so fascinating about jiu-jitsu, for example. Everybody that, like, if you go to a jiu-jitsu event or any of these things like ADCC and these huge events, every person in the crowd is there because they're either have trained with somebody who's on the mat, or they do the training and they're there as fans, which is a lot of the CrossFit Games. But for it to be
Absolutely.
a true spectator sport, like for like the UFC, for example, most of the people in the crowd aren't UFC fighters. They don't want
to get punched in the face. Yeah.
Whereas early in the UFC, this was fascinating. When we went to one of the first couple UFCs, everybody in the crowd was there with their fight team because they were MMA fighters or doing some form of combatives. And I'm sure, like, you go to your kids' taekwondo stuff, everybody that's there is either like a parent with their kid or somebody that does taekwondo. Like, I'm just not like, I did Shotokan, I do jits. I mean, I boxed. Like, I have friends that did taekwondo. I would not go to a taekwondo event unless they were like, hey, will you come and support me? I'll be like, yeah, like I appreciate it. But that was what was wild with CrossFit. When you go to those CrossFit Games, everybody there did CrossFit. I think the longevity of turning it into a spectator sport where, hey, I don't do CrossFit, but this is fun to watch was very different. Like watching the Rogue stuff and also the Wadapalooza. I mean, like I looked at it and was like, shit, that looks like a fun time. Like that looks like, even though I don't train in this way or, this isn't what my jam is, but this is exciting to watch. And these people are out there killing it and they're doing good stuff. And, it's good looking people. I mean, girls are wearing our bikinis. I mean, just from like a spectator standpoint, it looked like a good time. And the problem that I ran with the CrossFit Games is it never looked like a good time.
No, it never. A marathon row doesn't look like a good time ever, right? Like there's no getting around the fact that could be one of the most boring events. But you were talking about the metrics, right? Like you had a set of metrics, and one of the things we've spent a lot of time doing is actually figuring out what strength levels are required. What's a required back squat? What's a required front squat? What, clean, what jerk, what snatch. And so we have a lot of those. We also have the same things on the ergs. So we know where you need to have a 2K row, a 5K row. We know approximately where you need to have your mile run, your 5K run. And so really a lot of what we do isn't that different than even though it's concurrent, it's not a lot different than what you would do with athletes in other sports where the conditioning and the strength metrics are that's the strength and conditioning side. And then the sport is actually competing or not even competing, but training the CrossFit, the skills and the transitions and learning the tactics and components like that. So I think there's a lot to be said that early on, people just did CrossFit to try and get better at competitive CrossFit. And now it's almost like a lot of the elements are just strength and conditioning. They're accessory. They're the things that build the capacities that the athlete needs. And then there's the sport specific layer on top of that. And so it really isn't that different than the systems that you would use to train athletes in other sports.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, if you think about like Olympic weightlifting, for example, as a sport, like the training for Olympic weightlifting is snatch, clean, and jerk. And, let's say back squat and like the accessory movements that they're doing. But at the end of the day, like they're developing that proficiency piece. I mean, for what you guys are doing, like it only makes sense to kind of, it's almost like if somebody came to me and they're like, hey, I'm 6'2", 195 pounds. I want to play offensive line in the NFL. Be like, yeah, that's a tough one. 6'3" is about a center. The guards are now anywhere from 6'4" to 6'7". But for a guy to play guard, he has to be really mobile in his hips at that size. And like, it's kind of interesting. Like there's these different models that you go through and it's like, I benched 500 pounds. I did this. I know what guys can do. Now, a lot of guys might not bench 500, but when you're, 6'6", 365, like and you can move pretty well, you probably don't need to bench 500. For me, I was a 6'5", 305-pound white dude. I had to develop these things because I didn't have that extra 60 pounds. So like, it's kind of interesting where I played with dudes that were just bigger and they just could move mass, and they didn't necessarily have to be like weight room strong just because they had fucking gravity and inertia on their side. But I think with like the CrossFit, or let's just call it like fitness competition training, like, testing of this, there are probably historical benchmarks that, like, if somebody comes to you and it's like, hey, I want to be really competitive at this, and you're like, great, let's see where you're at. We know that, like, based upon 10, it might be longer, it's like 15, 17 years now. First games was in 07. We know based upon the evolution of this thing, if you want to be competitive, here's not only the times you need to hit, but here's kind of the physiological anthropometrical ratios of size that, like, most of the guys are between 5'9" and 6 feet. They weigh probably anywhere from like 180 to like 203 pounds.
We do that with BMI. So basically what I do is I know what elite CrossFitters BMI is.
Ooh, what is it?
It's around 28 to 28 and a half. 29, it would be the high end, 27 and a half is the low end.
So they're obese.
So yeah, they all are.
Yeah, they're all
crazy,
obese,
right? You got people that are running 18-minute 5Ks that are BMIs 28, which is pretty fucking impressive,
dude. And anything that's sub 20-minute 5K, and I know this because when we were in college one year, and talk about a fucking travesty of athletic performance. In college, my football coach, guy named Keith Gilbertson, came in and said, "We're plenty fast enough. We need more endurance. So we're changing the conditioning test to a 1 mile run." So what did we do? We didn't sprint anymore. Everybody just went out and we just basically did like track workouts. It was like 400s, 800s, and this. I ended up running like I was under 300 pounds. I weighed like 290, 287 that day. So over 300, you could run a 7:30. Under 300, I had to run a sub 7 minute. And I ended up running a 6:58 mile at like 287 pounds, which is fucking. And then we ended up going 3.
I want to see the power output calculation for that. Like, what is the average wattage that's required to? Because that's probably the equivalent of someone who weighs 150 pounds running like a 410 or 420 mile.
So I obviously, like in college, like there's a lot of athletes that are friends, and we would always like, you kind of like connect with them in the weight room or like down at the, like the Golden Bear Center, which was our academic deal. So I went down there and I was like looking for like anybody that was on the track team that was a runner. And I find like one dude who was like, ran the 1500, and I was like, yo man, I need some help. He's like, all right, let's fucking do it. So I would go out and train with him, and he would go out and we'd run these repeats, and like we'd go lift weights, and then at night I would go do this run thing. And it absolutely destroyed everybody's 40 time. Like nobody ran fast. We ended up going 3 and 8, and that coach got fired. But I know this, but one of the workouts we had to do was we ran a 5K, and like I ended up running like, I think it was like a sub 30-minute 5K, which it was like a 29-minute 5K, which I thought I was flying, but that little fucker ended up running something like 18 minutes. And he was absolutely like he got done and was like cheering me on. And I remember like, he's like, oh yeah, that was a good run. Like, I don't even know if that was a competitive time. He wasn't a 5K.
Probably super sub maximal for him.
Yeah. He just was jogging.
Because the competitive 5K guys they're in like the 14s, which is just insane, but they also weigh 130 pounds. So yeah, it's like apples to pumpkins.
They're comparison. Like arms and legs and lungs. But yeah, I mean, that's what's so impressive, where you see these guys, and like you said, they're deadlifting 500 pounds, they're cleaning 365, and they have a sub 20-minute 5K, and they have like, a sub 5-minute mile. Like it's impressive for human performance. And the fact that there's ways to test it and there's venues to do it, I'm all for it. Like if there's a sport to train for and it looks good and it's like and it's a good spectator and you have athletes that show up and they're well prepared, I'm in for it. But like you said, the problem I have is for people to port over that methodology and say, this is how everybody should be training. That's like me being like, well, I played in the NFL. This is the training we did. Every human being should train as if they're in the NFL because they might have to do this. Like it it felt disingenuous.
Because you might get hit by a linebacker at some, or you might get hit by a car. So you need to train.
Or like Terry Tate, the linebacker, office linebacker, you're there, at the water cooler and he lights you up. But like that was an issue that I got into with athleticism is kind of an interesting piece. And I'll kind of give a little bit of deviation on this. But athleticism is one of those things where you can tell if somebody's athletic. I'm sure you bring somebody in, you watch them do anything and and it's because it's visually appealing. Like we know this, like just like you walk in a place and you're like, oh man, this like we have this ability for symmetry. But I'm sure you training athletes and, you have people show up, reach out to you, hey, we're going to come in and train. And within the first few minutes, you can watch them do a few things and you're like, oh, this guy's a pretty good athlete. And then you usually say, oh, so what'd you do before this? And it's very rare that they're like, no, I've never done anything athletic other than this form of training. You're like, I don't buy that. Right. So I've always viewed athleticism as like the ultimate trump card, the ultimate like pretty girl in the room, the ultimate Ferrari in the parking lot. And I could always know. And even though I'm not a Ferrari guy, I still like I said, I consult for this rich dude. He has a collection of Ferraris. They are some of the most aesthetically pretty cars. I don't fit in them. They look very temperamental and I would not want one. But I appreciate the symmetry and the beauty and the attention to detail. It's like nothing else I've ever seen. So, but that to me is a little bit different than fitness, which I always ask people, like, what are you training for? Like, what do you need to use this for? If I'm training the pro BJJ guys, like, I want to be the best in the world, best heavy ultra, Victor Hugo. Like that's a very easy, if somebody can tell me where they want to go, we use the SAID principle, specific adaptation, imposed demands. We got all these cool levers and we can fucking dial them in. But there has to be something that's like almost the high water mark. Like, did the training work as we designed, right? If they go in the competition and they smash the world, then we knew that here's where they were before. This is where they are now. This is what the training looked like. Here's how we did it. Here's all the metrics that we used to test them. And it resulted in what I was looking for, which is what you guys are doing, right? We're bringing these athletes. We have all these metrics. We put them in the training. If they meet this, if this, then that. With fitness,
yes,
like my mom's fitness is at 80 years old. She walks 13,000 steps. Like her level of fitness and what she's able to do, we track with like, HRV in this and she does great. But that's a little bit different than, my 13-year-old daughters. And to say that like everybody's fitness is based off of this increased work capacity, broad time modal domains. Like it just didn't make sense to me. It just felt like a self-serving way to be able to sell gym memberships.
Well, to your point there, when I do like mentorship calls and things, and people are asking, they're like, well, so they've got a GPP client and they're like, well, what should their 2K row be? And I'm like, there's nothing their 2K row should be, because what's to say that they should be rowing a 2K? Like if their GPP, if their goal is just to be generally fit, there's no metric that says, hey, you need to have this, and you need to have a 300-pound back squat or a double body weight back squat. That's not really a necessary metric of fitness, and it's arbitrary, so arbitrary, right? But as soon as you shift and you're like, I have a goal, I have a competitive goal, I want to ruck 5 miles in under an hour and a half. Boom, we have metrics, we have tool, like you said, we have levers we can start to pull, we can start to actually train for things. And I think that in the training community in general and the fitness community in general, there is a massive conflation of general fitness and training for goals. And people need to understand that if all you're looking to do is be healthy, there aren't things that you should be able to do. There are just types of training that you probably should do consistently, because those lead to fitness. But you don't have to have, oh, I need to run a sub 24-minute 5K to be fit. It doesn't matter, right? It's fitness. You just need to be doing consistent. You need to run twice a week, or, for extended durations, if that's like one of the things that jives with your fitness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, we live here in Texas. I live on land, and we clean a creek. Like, so I have a creek that we've been working on for a long time to clean. So I have to go cut trees. The ability to be out there in like 90 to 100 degree heat and basically chainsawing and like dragging this stuff out, like that's a high level of fitness for me. It also facts that like level of fitness also ports over for my training and, jits and some of the things that I do. If like all of a sudden you were like, hey, you're not fit unless you can run a 24-minute 5K. I'd be like, well, I probably can't run a 24-minute 5K, but I'm able to accomplish my task much better than somebody who probably can run a 25-minute or 24-minute 5K. So I think it's pretty interesting. Like I always go back to the CrossFit Games where all of a sudden those dudes were super fit, and then they had that one where those guys had to like work those sledgehammers to be able to pound a spike in, and they couldn't fucking hit a spike. And like the one dude who was like crushed it, I think it was Tommy Hagenbrook, was like a fireman. He's like, yeah, I know how to swing a sledgehammer. I also worked construction. So like it's so arbitrary. And I think like what I like on the side for you guys is like, hey, like we have these competitions. This is what we're going to do. These are the metrics that you need, like BMI and the able to match. Like just like in the NFL, it feels that if there is a sport that we're going to train for, and these are the ideas, this is the people that are most successful, and we have metrics to get people there. But then again, not everybody might meet it because you might have intangibles that all of a sudden snap in, like I said, like in, the guy that might not be as strong, but he's 360 pounds and pretty damn athletic. Like that dude might not be able to hit the same numbers, but he has certain intangibles that are on game day. He can just do what's required of him.
Yeah, it's the 800-meter runner that you dated in college, right? Yeah. Having the ability to just switch off and deal with suffering. Because in the end, this sport, the way it's been tested and competed up to this point, is a suffering sport. It's a pain sport. And so that's your intangible, is the ability to deal with high levels of metabolic pain and not sacrifice your movement quality. Like that is the intangible in this sport. So you could have all the metrics, but lack that, and you probably wouldn't be all that successful here.
Can you train for it? Do you think that that's something that's trainable, or is it just something they have or they don't?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think part of it could be trained in the sense that the more you get exposure to it, the better you get psychologically at dealing with, there's so many fatigue signals. If in running, there's one fatigue signal. It's like this metabolic fatigue. But with CrossFit, if you're running and doing, 10 clean and jerks at 225, 5 rounds per time, there's so many fatigue signals coming in. There's neural fatigue, there's heat, you're overheating because whenever you cycle a barbell, you produce a disproportionate amount of metabolic heat. And then you're going to tack all that on top of already the like cardiovascular fatigue signals that you're getting. So it's like, there's so many that your nervous system's being bombarded by them all the time. But I think the more someone gets exposed to that, the better they get at dealing with it. And I think that's part of the reason that like you can have all the metrics, right? You can have the 365 clean, you can do 30 ring muscle ups, in 2 minutes and run your sub 20-minute 5K. But if you don't mix all of it together, you're not going to be a very good CrossFitter. You can have all the pieces, but you have to put it together in some sort of, and I don't want to use the word CrossFit, but you're not going to be a very good mixed modal functional fitness athlete if those things don't get mixed together. And I think that's the psychological part. And so I do think that the more experience someone gets with the sport, the better they kind of deal with that pain. But there's also people I've met that are just innately good at dealing with the suck. Yeah. I'm not. Mine was developed very slowly.
Football was like that. Whenever people so I played in, you're going to laugh at this. I played the hottest game in NFL history. It was noon Dallas, September 1st in the old Dallas Stadium where there was no roof, and it was like 175 degrees on the field.
Shit.
They told us like, don't lay down, you'll die. And we went out there and played and it was fucking awful. Like people were wilting like this, and people always asked me, and like at one point my feet were burning so bad on the turf, I was squirting the water bottles, like the cold water in my shoes, trying to get my feet to cool down. And then my shoes got wet and sloshed, which was even funnier because as I was running, I could see water coming off them. But people always ask me, hey, like you played in that game, what was it like? And I'm like, I don't really remember. Like there was a point where I just like kind of turned my brain off, and I just know that like after the game, I couldn't urinate. And when I did, it was, and I ended up learning about this through CrossFit, that rhabdo. I like peed like it looked like root beer. And I totally gave everybody, like we gave ourselves rhabdo, everybody, but we had been microdosing rhabdo for so long that like it didn't really matter. We were like super sore. Everybody was pretty achy. Like the pee was all weird. Like if they had tested us or done some form of like, whatever they take you to the hospital.
Like creatinine and whatnot.
Yeah. Oh, it would have been through the roof. We all gave ourselves rhabdo because I asked somebody, I was like, dude, have you pissed yet? And they're like, no. But another guy's like, yeah, mine was fucking black. Like, is that a problem? And I was like, I don't know. Like, we just didn't say anything. We just went to drink more water and we're trying to take more salt. And I was super sore for like a couple days. And then we just kind of like went on with our lives. And I think it was like knowing like rhabdomyolysis and some of the effects, like we totally did it. We just had just been microdosing it for so long through training camp and this, that it just, everybody kind of cleared themselves and was fine. But like,
Yeah, I don't want to say you were immune to it, but you'd at least built up some resistance to it.
Well,
yeah.
So before the game, they came in and like the officials, the NFL, the whole people came in and they were like, "Do we cancel this?" And the NFL was like, "We don't cancel games. You got to send these guys out." And like, so there was a moment where they were like, you know, if anybody falls on the turf and you lay there, like we could overheat and die. And the NFL was like, "We don't cancel games. Fucking go." And that was, you know, they're obviously paying you and they're required to do it. And so I think like with that mentality, it's like, well, you know, I guess we're all going out there together to do it, which is, I think, in that CrossFit deal where, you know, they're at the CrossFit Games, you're in this herd mentality, you know, maybe some people. And I actually respect after that guy passed away that a lot of the high level CrossFitters are like, "I'm leaving in protest because you guys haven't protected us." And I thought that was a very ballsy thing to do for the fact that like these guys, this is their livelihood, this is what they've trained, but they were willing to kind of take that stand. And, you know, CrossFit probably should have been like, "Yeah, we probably should cancel this thing," but they didn't. And they kind of went on. And I think it was an interesting break where I think they lost a ton of credibility and these other programs has rise. But I also, like you said, they're in this weird self-serving thing where like, you know, the training is this, but then the best guys in the world, like, do you remember Miko Salo?
Oh yeah.
Right.
He was a legend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Miko Salo wins the CrossFit Games and they put a mic in his face and they asked him what he did for his training. He was like a firefighter, like a woodland fire guy from Finland. He did a bunch of high intensity trail running and he lifted heavy weights. And when they asked him about his training,
and he had a rower in his closet.
Yes. Yeah, that was it. Yeah. He would basically, he's like, "Yeah, I do a lot of like a high altitude trail running for my job because we're woodland guys. And I lift heavy weights and then I do a bunch of like capacity stuff on the row." And that was it. And he's like, "I just learned a couple of skills to be able to do this stuff." And like, they like stuck this. And when he said that, they like basically cut it. And we were there and I heard him and it never made it out because, you know, here's somebody that won the games that wasn't doing their training as required. And that's what I think has been fascinating is as this thing's been gamified and gone in, like the original methodology has really just kind of poured it into this sport, which, I mean, we always knew was going to happen.
Yeah, I think we have moved as a training think tank has moved so far away from the original CrossFit methodology and into very much a periodized strength and conditioning program that has a sport specific layer, right? And CrossFit is the sport specific layer. I guess when I say we've moved away, you still have to do mixed modal functional fitness. Like,
yeah,
you
but
still
that's the
have
sport.
to do that
So you're training for your sport.
That's a sport.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like this whole layer of strength and conditioning, and then you have a sport layer. And I could imagine that years from now that you have strength and conditioning coaches who are writing the strength blocks and the conditioning blocks, and then a sport coach who's coaching just the mixed modal part in the same way that an NFL player might have a strength and conditioning coach. And then obviously you have your position specific coach and things like that. I could imagine that 5 to 10 years from now, we might see something like that. And I think we're already starting to see things gravitate that direction. People have endurance coaches, people have weightlifting coaches. And so I think we'll see more and more and more of that over the next 5 to 10 years as this whole thing evolves.
What are the non-negotiables in your programming, regardless of the athlete or the sport?
Dude, that's an awesome question. Okay, so regardless of the sport, I think, man, that's hard. When it comes to just general health, I think some of the things that show up in every program for athletes that I coach are going to include movement. Like, and when I say movement, I mean things that are mobility-esque, but just making sure that basic human movement is taken care of. Like, you need to be able to move your hips. You need to be able to move your spine. You need to be able to move your shoulders. Like, these are foundational things that are required for just, human movement and the human experience. And so that's something that's going to be involved for everybody. I think another big component is stress management, stress relaxation type techniques, things like box breathing, things like guided relaxation and things like that, because especially if people are training, we spend so much time in this sympathetic dominated fight or flight state. And then so few, especially today with our phones and all that shit, like we spend so little time disconnecting from that and taking a moment just to like slow down and drive ourselves back to this kind of rest and digest parasympathetic state. So I think across the board, regardless of the caliber of athlete or type of athlete I'm working with, those are two things that just kind of show up for everybody. And then I think it's really individual specific. So every program that I write starts with some sort of every session that I write for anybody starts with some sort of movement based prep. And obviously that's going to be adjusted for what they're doing in the session. And every session ends with box breathing or some sort of CNS downregulation to make sure that when they go back out into the world for the next, if they're recreational, the next 23 hours, or if they're an elite athlete for the next 20 hours, it's still, they need to be in a place where they're going to be able to calm down, to ramp the nervous system down and recover. But I think those are the two things that I think are absolutely essential for people, especially in just today's world. And then everything else to me is based upon the goal. I'm curious, what about you? What are your non-negotiables?
I think two things as we age, right? And I think in terms of like, I kind of break people into like two categories. Like, let's say like, aging population, right? Mitochondrial density and mitochondrial health is like, I believe is really like the frontier in terms of like aging and health. You can go back and look at like the Warburg effect, 80 years ago, Dr. Warburg theorized that all cancer was, related to mitochondrial dysfunction. Like the mitochondria become unhealthy, they no longer can convert to ATP. So then the cells to stay alive need to find another source that doesn't involve oxygen. And that fermentation of glutamine and glucose becomes cancer cells. So like mitochondrial dysfunction is massive, and it's even more apparent now. I mean, some of the things that increase mitochondrial health and mitochondrial density: big aerobic base, being able to sleep,
and sprinting,
lifting weights, direct sunlight, right? There's something that's called the Schumann effect, where the Earth is struck by lightning about 2,000 times every minute. Like it's some astronomical deal. And what it effectively does is by the Earth getting struck by lightning, I think it's 50 times a second. I have to look it up. But basically what it does is the Earth getting struck by lightning creates this kind of like almost like pulsing effect, which basically makes the Earth alive, right? It's shocking with electricity. If it were to stop, everything on the planet would be dead in 4 minutes. But like that charging of the Earth is, like how we kind of basically our hearts and how all human beings and all human life continues to live. But we don't no longer connect with it. So before we used to sleep on the ground was how we charged. Direct sunlight. I know this sounds hippy dippy, but it's actually scientific. Bathing in running water, like in a stream where it runs through. So like now we sleep in beds that are on top of concrete, artificial light, like we're not really connected. So like getting outside, getting direct sunlight, doing some things that increase mitochondrial health, I think is a non-negotiable for me. So for my people, and this is even with kids, you got to have some form of aerobic base. The bigger aerobic base, the more dense the mitochondria, the healthier you are. And I didn't buy into that at all. I was an NFL player. I thought if I lifted heavy weights and sprinted, fuck all that aerobic base stuff. It wasn't until...
John, the newest research that's coming out on training for mitochondrial density, they compared long, slow, kind of steady state aerobic. They compared high intensity interval training. So like in that sort of like threshold to VO2 range, and then sprint interval training. And they found that sprint training is 2.4 times more effective minute for minute. So 1 minute of sprint interval training is worth 2.5 minutes of HIIT training and worth 4.6 minutes of long, slow endurance. So even though you didn't do all of the basic aerobic, you got that sprint training, and That's the mitochondrial driver.
Yeah, but it like what I found was that when I built the aerobic base, my quality of movement when I did max effort improved because I had the faster ability to recover in between. So like, sure. So that was a piece. The other one is we lose the ability to recruit motor units. So you got to lift heavy weights. I've watched a ton of people do a lot of submaximal work. And if you're going to do submaximal work, you got to use compensatory acceleration, which is this mechanical advantage. So does bar speed. You got to be able to like move a bar fast. So you're either moving a bar at max velocity or you're lifting something heavy enough to where it actually slows down and you have to strain and you recruit motor units. But I think those are the two non-negotiables. You got to do something that's protecting, whether it be sprinting or even a combination of sprinting and developing aerobic base. You got to lift some heavy weights. I also believe just longevity is athleticism. So you have to do something that fosters and develop athleticism. And the way I break athleticism down, the ability to seamlessly and effortlessly combine primal movement patterns through space to accomplish a known or novel task, right? So you're going to have to be able to step, squat, and lunge, push and pull, and you're going to have to be able to do it in 3 different planes of motion, right? You're going to be able to do a sagittal, frontal, and transverse. And you have to be able to mix those 3 in interesting and fun ways to accomplish a known or novel task. So your ability, so I had a theory long ago that if we know what athleticism is, I can break it into the pieces. I can train the pieces and then reassemble them, kind of like the chunking methods. Like, letters become words, words become sentences, sentences become paragraphs, paragraphs become pages. Same deal. And I feel like if I would continue to have longevity and continue to have be good for a long period of time, I need to kind of be able to do something that fosters and develop athleticism and all these other pieces. Now, in terms of athletic skill development for kids, they probably just need to learn to lift weights well. They need to be able to throw something, swing something. I mean, just some really basic. The other one that's a non-negotiable for me is what I call trunk work. I always hated the word core because apples and pears have cores. So I use the word trunk because here in Texas, we have these bitchin' oak trees that like fucking stand up to anything. And so some form of trunk work is like at the front part. You were talking about prep work. I always put some movement prep and there's always some form of trunk work. And our trunks aren't really designed to like extend and flex really. I mean, they can, but like that isometric contraction where now I'm learning to hold this position and basically tie my upper body to my lower body. Like those are important. Like I was never a huge kettlebell guy, but what I liked was the task specific tension of the swing and like, the ability to relax and then flex within the trunk was important and the ability to stay rigid. So I think some form of trunk work, some form of athleticism, and then got to be able to lift some heavy weights and, sprint and do something that involves some form of aerobic base. We had Joel Jameson on the podcast and he has that trained by Morpheus Tech. And it was pretty fascinating on the podcast. He said, that kind of, for me, it was like anywhere between like 91 beats a minute up to 149 beats a minute is kind of my recovery zone. And he's like, that is the deepest pool you can find. Like there's no amount, like if you did 150 minutes at minimum, if you did 400 work, like there's no way to max out that pool. There's no way to find the bottom of it. So that really changed my kind of perception of being like, all right, like if we're training these upper registers, like, am I doing enough recovery work? And then how am I monitoring that recovery? HRV, what's my sleeping look like? How many breaths am I getting? What is my resting heart rate? Like, last night in sleep, I think my resting heart rate's like 46. I'm somewhere around 15 beats a minute or
39 for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's fucking great. Like for just like some metrics and being like, yeah, dude, I got a resting heart rate of 46. I do about 15 breaths a minute. My HRV is this, and like the ability to track that stuff is pretty good because you can start kind of seeing like when I don't do that, all of a sudden it starts creeping back up. But it's That's
actually a really good point. The more time I spend doing sort of that zone 2, like you were talking about, that lower intensity aerobic work, the lower my resting heart rate gets. I've seen it down around 36 at its lowest, and my heart. I have a lot of athletes and we track, for a long time, I had them using Whoop and we tracked heart rate variability, and they would be in the 60s to 70s, and mine was always in the 120s to 160s, which I know that it's very individual and everyone has a different set point. But I also did a lot more aerobic work throughout my life because I was a swimmer. And, they would be on there and be like, man, how's your heart rate variability to high? But I also do a lot to take care of it. Like I'm a regular sauna user. I went through the whole ice bath thing, although it's not, I don't think that's
what do you think about ice baths
so much. I'm just not a big, I don't know. I did it. it makes me really sleepy afterward. Like I almost like have to take a nap. And it also makes me really hungry
Uh,
afterward. So I have, I think, a very like paradoxical response to it. Some people get done and they're like, man, I feel like I'm reborn. And I'm like, I feel like I have to go to sleep right now.
so
I'm not a
the
huge fan.
I think it's called it's not Moroso Forge. It's like Morzocco, or I'm gonna butcher their name, dude. I butcher names constantly. But like these guys, I follow them on Instagram. Doc Parsley has one of their units, and it's like this. I think Joe Rogan has it. It's like this big fucking coffin and pumps out ice, and it's a big ice deal. And they do post a lot of research, and obviously it's all very pro ice bath. But they say that cold exposure is good for mitochondrial health. But I also believe that too much of anything is a bad thing. So I think like periodically, I always recommend everybody like, hey, if you want to do it, like give me like a 3-day a week. Like if you want to do it like on a Monday, Thursday, Saturday, or let's say you want to do it a Saturday, Sunday, and a Wednesday, like give me 3 days. Like don't do it every single day. The other thing too is they're like, oh, do it 90 seconds, 2 minutes. I'm like, dude, I'm a thick steak. I take longer. So I'll like get in for,
you got to cook for a while.
Yeah. It takes longer to thaw. So I'll get in for like 5 minutes. Like some mornings if I get in and I feel too comfortable, like if I get in and I'm like, I sit down, I go, oh, like this feels really good. I just get out. Like if I don't,
today's not the day.
Well, no, then I know it's not going to do anything. Like if I get in and I'm like,
today's not the day for it.
If I'm like counting the minutes and I'm like, fuck man, this is really cold. That's the days I stay in. If like the days I get in and it's just too easy, I'm like the one thing that I do like the sauna, the sauna, like research that came out of Finland where like, I think it was like, was it 60 to 70, 80 minutes a week? Like the chance of heart attack go to zero. I mean, every man on this planet, like 99.9% of us either going to die from a heart attack or some form of cancer. And if you can pretty much like wipe the, heart attack, like that form with the sauna, I think that's an easy, very, very easy ask.
So where I'm at right now, I have my Concept 2 bike inside of my sauna, and I have my sauna set to 120 degrees, and 3 days a week I'm in there for 30 minutes on the bike, sweating my fucking ass off. It is insane. So I'm operating at below my zone 2 paces. So if I pulled the bike out, strap the heart rate monitor on and ride, my zone 2 pace is like 159 to 202, right? 159. Yeah. It's kilometers per kilometer. And I put the bike in there and I'm riding at 215 pace and I'm at 170 beats per minute, but there's no effort. There's no strain for it, but my heart is working so hard because you got to push the blood to the skin to try and cool, and you're sweating your ass off. But I think that is a whole area of performance that hasn't really been that well explored. There's good amount of research on training in the heat to improve like room temperature performance, but I've been dabbling in that. But with ice baths, I look at them more as a performance enhancement tool. So we use them post event to bring body temperature back down, because a lot of people have to recover in an hour and a half and be ready to compete again. And so I just look at it as like, hey, what tools do we have to bring people back to homeostasis as quick as possible so that we can get into the next event and be ready to compete? And the ice tub is king for body temperature.
No, I got in an ice bath almost every single day of my NFL career. That was it. At the end, like training camp, we got an ice bath in this. So it was kind of funny when this whole ice bath thing came up, and I would watch people, you see Joe Rogan over there and he's like hyperventilating. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like this was just like a post practice. So like we had the guys from Ice Barrel on the podcast, and they brought a unit. And so I have it set up. But I keep it as cold as I can get it, which is usually like between 39 and 42. And I'll usually just get in. Like if I'm like, I actually, this is wild. If I get in, it delays me wanting to drink coffee. Like and then normally what I'll do is I get out, like I did like 5 minutes today at like 40 degrees, but then I get on the bike and I'll ride as fast as I can
to warm yourself up.
Yeah. To try to get my heart rate up. Dude, it took me like it wasn't 20 minutes. It was like 17, 18 minutes for me to get my heart rate up to like where I needed it in the 130s, 140s. Like I was riding pretty good, and I was like 75, 80, 90. And to the point where I was like, fuck, like I was breathing heavy, but I couldn't get my heart rate up. And then finally at like 18, 19, and I rode for like 25, 30 minutes, 25, just it ended up being 27, 28 minutes. But then finally in that last 7 or 8 minutes, I got my heart rate, which was into like the 137, 140s.
I've never tried doing the ice bath pre-exercise. I've heard a lot about it. I've heard people talk about it before, but I've never given it a legit shot before. I should give that a try. I mean, it's
Yeah.
literally sitting out there. What I'll do is I'll do the ice bath and then go right into my sauna bike and see what happens.
Yeah, that's, I think, are going to be our next evolution. So yeah, the Texas sun destroys everything. So I bought a sauna for Black Friday and I have it ready to go, but I had to build a cover for it. So I ended up buying a welder because I weld. And so I built a cover and I finally got the sheeting on and everything. So I'm going to basically assemble it this week, but I got a big enough barrel sauna that one, I can stand up straight. I'm like 6'6", so it's 7 feet, but it's big enough for me to put like an Echo bike in there. And that's going to be my next thing is like, I'm going to ride in there. That's going to be, I'm glad you said it because that's kind of what I've been like brainstorming, the idea of like getting in the ice, going in there.
Don't go crazy with the temperature when you first start. I started it down at like 110.
That's smart.
But if my sauna goes up to 194, and I think if I tried to do that, I think I'd be dead. So start light.
Wasn't like Laird Hamilton and those guys doing something crazy where they were having to wear like oven mitts because the bike was too hot?
Yes, and they had it turned way up. I would start low and slow.
I want to say they were like 212, like in the bike, because I remember seeing a picture of Laird with like wearing oven mitts and like had something on his feet because like the bike was too hot because they had the sauna turned up. That felt a little extreme.
Hey, John, give me just a second. I got to go check on something over here real quick.
Yeah, no problem. Dude, actually, that was a perfect break. Like one amazing podcast, dude. It was great to connect with you. I feel like we're kindred spirits, and I'm glad we got hooked up on this thing, dude.
I appreciate it. When I talked to Ben a little while back, and he was like, "Yeah, we should have you on the podcast." I was pretty excited about the idea. I definitely think there's a lot of shared elements between what you had started in the CrossFit community and where I feel like myself and Training Think Tank has kind of gravitated towards bringing in some of the more classic strength and conditioning principles into a sport that desperately needed it. Well, too bad it drove you guys away.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just was part of the deal, but we had to go on. But yeah, man, I really appreciate you guys doing the education, and hopefully, if I'm ever in Atlanta, dude, we'll hook up. And if you're ever in Austin, please reach out.
Will do. Awesome.
All right, man. Best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by ko-fi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.